Hey, it's Lisa and Dan. Welcome to the Be Make Do Soul Makers podcast, where we explore art making and creativity from a place of deeper calling and encourage you to become who you are created to be, make what you are created to make, and do what you are created to do.
And this season, we're talking about motivation, success, and fulfillment by exploring the 6 artist archetypes: the maker, the mystic, the imaginative visionary, the storyteller, the soul healer, and the prophetic critic.
Yes, and we have created this really fun tool to help you become really conscious of what motivates and excites you to make what you are created to make. Because we're all different, right? And we probably none of us fit neatly into one category. But thinking about your deeper motivations can help you build a creative path for your work in life that is fulfilling and avoids getting caught in traps around striving for some idea of success or career that might not really fit you. In addition to exploring these archetypes, we'll be talking with creatives about how their unique motivations help them overcome challenges and find sometimes unconventional paths to a fulfilling life in the arts.
Want to know what your artist archetype is? Head over to soulmakers.org/quiz and find out. In our previous episode, we explored the imaginative visionary, not the imaginary visionary, because I kept saying that. We looked at the motivations, challenges, and what's necessary to thrive. If you haven't had a chance to listen, definitely go back and do that when you get a chance.
So on this episode, we'll be talking with Erik Løkkesmoe of Outback Presents in Nashville, Tennessee. Erik's archetype is definitely an imaginative visionary, and I can't wait to dive into this conversation with him.
Let's do it.
Erik's the Vice President of Marketing at Outback Presents, the leading independent full-service promoter of live entertainment based in Nashville. Erik began his work in Washington, D.C. politics, serving as a congressional press secretary, a speechwriter, head of communications for the National Endowment of the Humanities. Then he served as the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Outreach for Walden Media in Los Angeles until 2008, when he co-founded Different Drummer, an unconventional marketing and publicity firm. Then he was part of Aspiration Entertainment Ventures, which has been instrumental in the success of dozens of films, including Won't You Be My Neighbor? He's the author of several titles, including Upended and The Revolutionary Communicator, and Different Drummer, Bold Thinking for the Rebellious Creative. He and his wife, Monica, have 3 children and live in Nashville, Tennessee. And I am really excited to talk with Erik today about what motivates an imaginative visionary. Hi, Erik.
Hello, Lisa. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. A minute and a half since the very, very early days in DC with the brewing culture email.
I feel like you gave me a tour back when your space was just being formed.
Okay.
You just converted it and you gave me a space. And I've always been amazed at what you're trying to do and have done, and equipping not just DC, but the entire country and world with interesting takes and resources. So thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you. I mean, you were, I'm not even sure how we got connected to begin with, but the work that you were doing and the conversations and questions you were asking were just such a touch point and encouragement to me. Like, okay, there's other people. There's people that are doing it, trailblazing.
Like the questions have not been answered. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
But it has been since, early 2000s. I think we met because we were trying to create a space where you had suits and artists left and right, people of all different perspectives, at least gathering around some type of artistic work, because that became the centerpiece for conversation when everything else was, even, this is 23 years ago, still things haven't changed. They've gotten much more heightened, but the arts, as we know, and we talked about before, have a way of bringing people together in unique ways.
Yeah. And I feel like even at the time that was where the seeds of all the things was being born. And I felt like I was seeing, this is really interesting. Something is happening even with artists and owning this sense of, the arts are really this path to deeper truth. And we really want to dig into that, even seeing that within the art world itself outside of anything else, and really wondering, like, what would it look like for the church or Christians to come alongside these people and say, yeah, you're onto something. And we want to be in conversation. And I think it has been a 20-some year like gestation period that maybe even just now is the time where some things are starting to pop out of the soil.
So. Yeah, so I'm 1973 baby, and I think about...
Me too.
Are you really?
The same age, yes.
We will not do the math.
We don't need to do that, no.
But that age of, we grew up with parents, grandparents had a certain perspective on what you do and what your mission and meaning is, and how you find that, and what's your how you make a living and have an impact. And we're also the generation that grew up with gaming and with the rise of movies that became the centerpiece of cultural conversations. You know, certain movies everyone saw.
Right.
Still had limited channels, cable. And then you went into, we were the first, I think my senior year was the first time we had online access. So I do feel like our generation, our age, saw so much of this transitioning and the democratization of the arts, and a break from our parents and grandparents where we finally had ourselves, and then of course generations behind us are saying, I don't have to choose between my spiritual practice, my belief, and my art and output, and where I go to do that. I can go to Paramount, I can go to Pixar and be very fulfilled and connected and aligned with what I believe. And it's not setting that on the table or leaving it at the door.
Right.
There's a long way to go. There's a long way. There's a lot of progress, with a lot of things still left to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you talk about like when we were growing up in the cultural atmosphere. I as a teenager kind of on one hand felt the very strong, the culture war coming from the conservative background that I had, which had even changed since I was a kid to when I was a teenager. I remember wrestling with that. But then feeling like I was seeing in so many movies and hearing in music, like I'm turning around and saying, but I'm hearing like they're talking about this. They're longing for these deeper things, these spiritual things. Why aren't we paying attention? Why aren't we engaging in this way? And why aren't we listening as certain things are being reflected back? Why are we fighting about what the content should be and engaging more deeply in it together? And that's, for me, it's been a lifelong quest. You know, that's just, I can't let this stuff go. I'm like, let's get in there. Let's get in there.
Oh gosh. Yeah. So I think you nailed it, because I went into DC with, in a political role and wanted to be a speechwriter and did that, press secretary, and I worked in politics. But the reason we created this separate space is because, like you, I was beginning to understand common grace. And I think that's a really underdeveloped concept in the spiritual formation of people, of old and young. I think it changes everything when you understand that you can look at a song by Noah Kahn and you can say, that rings true. There is something about that line that is absolutely true, even if, and I don't know where he is, but even if he doesn't share my own beliefs or my lifestyle or my anything in common, there's something that when you listen to a song, you go to a gallery, you read a book, you watch a movie, a show, that you're tapping into something that is otherworldly.
Yeah.
And common grace basically, as you know, says that God's creative imprint and input is on us and all people and all humans.
Yeah.
And in creation. So we're always catching glimpses of what is true and good and beautiful. And until you have those eyes to see, I think you either get really confused or you get really angry.
Yeah.
But they don't believe, or they don't share this, or then it's more confusion of what I want to stand up and applaud that dancer, but I now feel shame or guilt or something else, or fear. So that was a turning point for me, and I think that's something I'm disappointed that we're not further along in that regard of thinking.
Well, I think it is confusing because the depth of conversation maybe hasn't, or is maybe emerging. I would like to imagine that, because the other side of that is observing people who make it to superstardom, who for one reason or another either have grown up as Christians or become Christians and then are celebrated. We've got one. But the most support that we can give is to, get them baptized, get them to a church on Sunday and say that you're a Christian.
Yeah.
But not the support system to come around side to say, okay, what does that mean as a creative person who I believe it's a priestly and prophetic role. I do believe it requires a lot of depth to make art well. And you see it, just like we're talking about these artists who, whatever their background, you listen to interviews with actors or musicians or writers, like they can, what they're thinking about philosophically and spiritually often is so deep and complex. So the need for theological, understand that art is a theological tool, or it can be, it's part of the way that we process what it means to be human. Mm-hmm. It's more than just a label. Like there really is, it's tough to go into that space and just have it be another label that you wear,
I've always felt there's two roles. You have the audience role, and there's a certain role that we all play. And it's not passive, and that's tended to be the consumer mentality is
right,
that we just take it in and accept it or purchase it, click it, whatever, consume it. And then you have the artist over here, and I think you and I share this belief that there are some faults on both sides. I look at the audience and say, if we could ever have you be a patron and a participant, and when I think of practical ways that looks like, especially in house of worship, it would be, and this was floated out in Denver in 2018. I put this out to some artists, and I felt the room kind of lean forward, not because I had anything brilliant to say, but I think there was so much longing for practical expressions of what audiences can do beyond consumption. Yeah. And it was about this question of what if you gave 1% of your time, your space, and your money to artists, and that as an institution, as a house of worship. And the numbers are so large because you have, 300,000 house of worship in the US. But part of that was the idea of time is 1% of your year is a weekend. And whether you're a family or individual or institution of business, a house of worship, to set aside a weekend to say, we're going to do something intentional, film festival. We're going to have artists come up to our, and pray for them. We're going to have them display their work. We're going to have workshops. We don't have that intentionality as individuals, institutions. And I think that's what artists are looking for is, okay, just don't be passive. Mm-hmm. Be with me. If you love my work, if you love what I'm doing, be more involved. And then on the other side, artists need to think they love the preciousness of being an artist at times, of something special. And as a 4 on the Enneagram, I love when we're all something special. But they need to open the space up more for that patron collaboration with the audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there are so many models within artist social practice and artist community engagement. There are a lot of things that I think could be explored and borrowed, but I feel like part of where we're having to start with what we're doing with Soulmakers and Be Make Do is to have the conversation about why it matters. Why is it important? What to raise the awareness of the level of impact that the media and culture and everything around you affects and shapes not only you, but your neighbors, the world, which then in turn shapes you. And not even understanding, I think, that the commercials you're hearing repeatedly, that started in some artistic brain somewhere way back in the chain, yes. The music from that came from, where it's that, what Mako Fujimura was talking about a long time ago about going upstream and putting cultural artifacts into the water upstream as opposed to responding downstream. But I still think that is really hard for people to grasp. And then even for artists sometimes to take the responsibility of that without the like, I'm special, like sometimes there's also a reaction to like, I don't want to make, as a Christian, I don't want to make myself special. I'm not special. I'm not anything, but I really am, to take it seriously. No, it's a job. Like we have a job to do. We were put here for a reason.
Yeah.
Too.
I think if you're a Christian who happens to be an artist, or how we want to phrase that, because I do worry that Christian is a marketing term now. So it allows the audience to understand. It's a way for marketers to say, and labels and producers to say, okay, this is for you.
Right.
And has certain connotations. So we know that. I don't know if that's a tired argument, but it's an old argument that the movies that I worked on and care about were in that middle space. And they were invitational to both because they had things that were in that common grace, and they were just profound, resonate with both audiences. But if you are an artist who is trying to live out your faith and you feel compelled to, let's say, do something that's more of a worship, let's say music, well, you're kind of stuck into a system that is really around profit, which nothing wrong with that. But you start leaning into things where it has to be measured. So if it's making money, but then it has to have, if you want to talk about making impact, well, we tend to look at that from I would say investor, or from is this useful and worthwhile? Does it move the needle on policy and politics? And does it move people into conversion? And the moment you start saying that an artist, your job is really two things. You have to move the culture into a certain place. That's your agenda. Or you have to move people into a certain place. I think you put a huge burden on the artist, and you're really putting them into a pigeonholed view of what they can do.
Right.
So that's where I love the fact that we're democratizing and we're more independent. But you can hear even now, for the last few years, artists who are just increasingly frustrated with the system.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's so tough.
Very hard. I don't envy the artist today, but artist is very broadly defined, right? The creative person who's never doesn't have a title song, doesn't have a producer credit, but is in the editing bays, is designing the next building in the high rise of Chicago. I mean, those are highly creative, talented people. And we tend in these conversations to think of only those that have the credits. Right. And there's so many that you're working with that are just faithful, creative. They want to do with meaning. They want to bring beauty. They want to bring something has impact and lasts. Yeah. And we tend to forget those.
Yeah. See, because it's, you're talking about the pressure that's on the artist, and the problem is, like, art doesn't work that way. You can't control what the outcome or the impact of something that you create. So starting from that place is a setup for failure in general, or feelings of failing, or almost like winning the lottery or something. So I think that's where understanding art making, from my perspective, as it was intended as a spiritual tool, as a spiritual language, like, you can make art do whatever you want. You can speak however but it was intended for this thing. It does speak to people on that like rings true level. And the only way that you can do that authentically or effectively is to really say something, to really create something. And so then, like, we at Soulmakers, we talk about calling, kind of trying to define that as 3 parts. So not just what you do, the things that you do or the things that you accomplish, but really also thinking about becoming who you were created to be and making what you were created to make, as well as doing what you're created to do. So spending time in each of those 3 things, like, it matters. Like, I think it's Walter Storff who says that there's always a world behind the work. So attending to the world behind the work is your primary job. And then attending to the way that you make, the daily practice, the proficiency, the way that you interact with people. Like, wherever you are, even if you haven't saved the money to get on the bus to go to Nashville or whatever yet, like you are living out your call, living out your purpose fully if you are really attending to those things on a daily basis and then doing whatever it is God's calling you to do wherever you are right now. And that'll change over the course of a career, especially for a creative, because you never know where you're going to end up. I certainly didn't think I'd be here when I started out,
right.
So I think that's some of it.
I absolutely love that, because it is, and maybe it's our social era and the pressure of we're looking and seeing success, perceived success, that there's a rush that happens. There's a urgency that I think creative people feel that, gosh, I'm not there yet. I've got to do this. Is that human being versus human doing? And you're tapping into the world behind the work is where are the artists getting their rest and replenishment? And Mako, you mentioned him earlier, talks about recreation, recreation. That is the same word. And that are you doing things and reading things and taking the moments to build the capacity to be creative? You cannot give what you do not have.
Right.
And then your process, you talk about the way of doing things is so powerful, because again, we're all prone to have this short change, cut corners approach to anything we do.
Right.
We're in a race. We feel like we're in a race of limited time, or that person's success has now limited my potential. And I think this is where there's lots of headlines that could be, I'd love to have the entire, this sounds arrogant, but like the entire church in front of you say, okay, here's the things we got to worry about. And one of them is a short-term vision for what you're doing. It's like 2 years out. It's the next quarter. It's the next election. It's the next whatever, next trend. Instead of thinking, okay, well, where does this look like in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years?
Yeah.
When we're all gone. And you look back and think, well, the great artists, a lot of them are creating for the moment, and they may have no idea that they were going to create something that lasts 500 years. But there is something that surfaces or lasts than most of the stuff I see coming out of, especially in the Christian world of art, will be forgotten in 2 years.
See, and that's, I think when I was reading a long time ago, reading N.T. Wright's Surprised by Hope, and I was recently reminded of this idea of being part of the new creation, but the idea that what we create now has eternal significance. It will be around forever if it is, if it's good, true, and beautiful, and it kind of contributes to that ethos. Like I really think about, I want to believe, and I want to encourage, the artist or the writer who's like writing in their basement, and they do one great thing and they think nobody's ever going to read it, and 50 years from now somebody picks it up and it shifts that person's life, or it shifts the world. You just never know. And yeah, I love that, thinking beyond that 2 years, because it's so easy to fall into that and think from a business. I mean, I think it's important for us to be able to say it out loud and encourage people on a consistent basis to not think that way, because I know I struggle with that all the time. Like, it's not big enough. It's not good enough. It's not snapping yet, as opposed to just saying, no, I'm responsible for creating and creating well. And God will do what God will do with it. And it really is a different way of being. But it's hard. It's hard to hold on to that.
So good. Yes. Because it is, I've found this in my creative world tends to be kind of the producing side of the marketing, producing that something's completed and that needs to get out to the world. That's where I've had in my career is, okay, it's a film, it's a piece of music.
You're the guy everybody wants to be best friends with.
I know that's not true. Because, marketers are the first ones to be blamed if things don't go well.
Gotcha.
Never the content.
No.
But what I've seen is that part of what we miss as creative people is that we look at the final product. We did not look at the process and what we learned and how we treated people along the way. I just was talking to a filmmaker who was telling me horrific stories of a film that people have seen, that people were saying, oh, this is going to have such an impact. It made money. But behind the scenes, the way these producers and director were treating everything from their grips to their PAs to their catering, like it just was an awful environment. And I think you have, yes, your work is seen and is visible and people respond to it, but the people you're treating along the way and how you're treating them and how your crew, if you're on a larger production or if you're going to a venue and you treat the venue staff horribly, like that is a part of your art, is loving people well and serving them as they serve you and what you're creating. And I think we miss that. Like, oh, it's just what's on the screen or on the Spotify list. And it's all the things behind it, all the process, all the people that are along the way.
Yeah. And that's so in the search for my personal fulfillment or my personal goals, it's so easy for that to get lost and, our own traumas and demons and all that kind of stuff pop out in those high pressure situations, I think that's where, the focus on developing that becoming who we were created to be, but then also having a support system of people who are challenging us to say, I don't see what you're saying. Your mouth's talking, but I don't see it, to really be able to challenge us in those ways, to say there's something bigger here.
Yeah. The community side of that, Nashville, where I am now, it has been a Storyville for a long time. A lot of publishing here on the book side. There's been a lot of music, of course, that came out of the crossroads of America. Everyone started their tours here, is how Nashville, I had friends who were in New York and their bus would start in Nashville, go to pick them up in New York and come back to Nashville to go start their tour. So
wow.
They moved here, but there's something about this 2 hours from everywhere by flight type of notion. The fear is that you're going to lose the collaborative spirit of the city, which in music especially, you'd sense that there's a lot of like working together and rooting each other on and showing up for shows and lending your voice and there's an underground there that is super special. And I don't know if that's the same thing in other cities. I know LA, which I lived, it is built upon a perception of success, and to offer yourself up to someone who's trying to rise up is a diminishing view of your career.
Right.
And in New York, I think there's lots of challenges there because you're at a different level and pace and financial world of arts there. Other cities may have it. Austin, I think, has some of that, but that's what's special when you have a community that is saying, we're going to end this together, and there is a feeling that they're against the labels. There's a bit of a locking arms around the independent artist who's trying to make it. But yeah, the community that's just rubbing shoulders with you in your work is so important.
Yeah. Well, that makes me kind of want to dive deeper into this conversation about motivation and creating a pathway for a career and thinking about success, because the question often pops up around, somebody saying like, I want to show in this gallery, or I want to sell more of my work, or I want to do, but I hate marketing and I'm terrible at business. And those are, important questions, but there are classes and books and people you can hire, there are ways to address that. Not to say that it's not hard or a mystery, because it is for me. Social media is a mystery, but like to take a minute and step back and ask why. Like, why do you want those things? Do you even really want that? What do you really want? Like, do you really want to be famous? Or do you want to act in great films and have great roles? Because that's not necessarily the same thing. Like, do you want to work consistently, as an actor? That was my background anyway. You know, you could say, like, I got to the point where I realized I don't really want to do everything it takes. I don't have that personality to do what it takes to try to get in that place. What I really want to do is be the lead actor in a play that's really freaking good, you know? And so that brought me to ended up in DC and starting my own theater company, you know, like I think there is a little bit of questioning. There's not one path to success, especially for creative people. And I think I almost feel like that's a radical thought for a lot of people because we have such clearly defined lines of what it looks like to be successful. But success and fulfillment as an artist aren't necessarily the same thing. What do you, I mean, I'm sure you've seen tons of stuff.
That's in every single person's mind and heart, I think is, you know, what does it look like? You know, when is enough, or when do I feel most fulfilled? And when do I feel in the flow as a creative person? And is that enough? Or is there something that I'm missing, or that is this going to last, this feeling of fulfillment? And I think there's plenty of stories of people who are successful who long to be back with their guitar in a studio have just created that first song that no one else has heard, and it just is magic in the room.
Yeah. And
they're now performing in front of tens of thousands of people, but there's a magic about the unknown, the undiscovered, the process, all that. And it happens in every entrepreneurial's garage or basement, or in a lab for chemists. It happens certainly in every sector, every city. There are people who are imagining something, and there's like, this is working, or we found something. Let's play off that. And that feeling doesn't always last. And then the question is, well, how do I make money on that? How do I make a living? And we have to change there's lots of good thinking and podcasts and writers about this, but what does that look like to be fulfilled and make a living? And I think as you get older, you have the benefit of saying, boy, these are things I enjoy. These are things I'm good at. I just want to do those things. And the ambition has changed. There's a saying that I'm sure you heard this, where if in the 20s, you think you can do everything. In the 30s, you think you can do nothing. You're terrible at everything. And then 40s, you think you can do one thing. And then 50s, you actually do it. And it resonates because in my 20s, boy, I was the worst, because I'm a striver. And so I have to embed the word abide from John in my being, because I would break down doors. I would push open anything for a chance to make something. Because I think a lot of it comes from my own past and I think there's a number of people in our age group who feel this, where I feel fulfilled when I perform, when I have some success. At last, it goes away.
Yeah.
I feel low. I need to hit that again in my career cycle or my work. And so in my 20s, I was pursuing everything to feel whole and feel alive and feel like I had worth. And then 30s too, and then just getting older, I'm like, I could do that, but that sounds exhausting and miserable.
Yes.
Like you said about you know, doing something major on some Broadway show, you know, exciting. The thought is amazing. And then you're thinking, do I really want that?
That's a lot of work. Yeah. No.
And it's not just, you know, I think it's not just we're tired. I think we realize that, gosh, there's something more beautiful in a conversation around a meal that is actually far more satisfying and lasts longer and deepens us. So I'm with you. It may be age. It may just be a right sizing in the world of, we've all been taught that if you hit these things, you will feel this way. And there's enough now that we realize that is not true.
Yeah. 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 I had a conversation with myself a couple weeks ago, or a month or so ago. I was supposed to go to a big event and I couldn't go because I was sick. And I was so upset all night long that I couldn't go, because I should go for so many different reasons. It would, you know, it's such a good, I need to keep this network active. I need to do this. And I had a dream that night where I just thought, you know, I'd really like to be involved with people who actually just really care about what I'm doing. I've done a lot of things where I'm trying to be available for other people and help out. And some of that is thinking that'll lead to another opportunity later. But it was so far outside my sphere that it never materialized into anything. And I'm grateful for those relationships and those opportunities, but you don't have to do everything. It isn't a constant striving. And that I'm with you. I've started to get into this place of prayer of just saying, God, and I know that I'm not enough for this task ahead. And so I always struggled with just do your best, because I'm like, well, if I do a little bit more, I can do better. Maybe I could do better. I don't know where that line is. And being able to just stop like way back from that and say, I think that's just all I can do tonight. And so God, take the rest, and seeing how actually effective that really, really is starting to give me a lot of freedom that I don't I really don't have to strive. Like it's not, the world is not going to end because I stopped trying to run it. In fact, nobody will notice.
Not up to you.
Yep.
You don't control the planet. I mean, that is the mustard seed in a different way, that our talent, and there's plenty of this in the parable of talents too, but the mustard seed of our smallness and what we actually can control and what we can contribute, it is so small. We think we're bigger than we are. We think we have a greater influence, and it's helpful to know that no one's thinking about us right now. We're not on the minds of thousands or millions of people, for sure. Hopefully on the minds of a few people who care about and love us.
Yeah.
But that the smallness is helpful in that it gives you a sense of significance in the small things, like you said earlier. Is the daily habits of doing the things that are small and never seen are truly art, and does contribute in great ways to what you're doing that's more public. And I love the people who are, and you have many people like this, I'm sure, in your life, where you're around them and there's just a contentment about the work they're doing.
Yeah.
And I need that, because as a marketer, it's always about, well, we got to go further, more measurable, what's success, what's winning. And the business side of that is important, of course, but there's something beautiful about being around people who are just like, I wrote a great poem this year.
Yeah.
And that, I think it frustrates me, because I want that. It makes a little bit, examines my own ambitions and striving.
Yeah. Well, I noticed, I did look at the quiz. You took our Archetypes quiz, and I saw that you scored in the Imaginative Visionary kind of realm, which makes sense, like being about ideas and, trying to, you can see something, the potential for something to happen and wanting to make it happen. And I'm resonating in that space as well. And I just wonder, like, I think part of that trap is feeling like, this is going to sound really funny, but it was this year I've really started to realize, I can't do everything, can I? Like I'm having to admit that to myself. There is a part of my brain is like, every single one of my ideas is brilliant and it should be able to happen. And the idea of letting go of that, not every great idea is going to happen. And maybe one, like you were saying, I love that, like at 50, you're actually going to do it. I feel like that's where I am. It's like, if I could just focus on one, and then also have the humility to say, my gifting is in these ideas, and see how things connect. And I have to partner with other people to make some of the actual pieces fall into place. And that means being able to do less, think in bite-sized pieces, but then that is what then leads to the ability to, all right, we can chill a little bit, because I'm not trying to run 6 races all at the same time. It's just one, and we're walking together. Do you, like, what are your challenges with kind of the way your brain works?
Oh gosh, that's like an 8-part series. My I'm a professional plate spinner. I have been.
I like that.
I've learned that is impossible to do, and it dilutes me. It dilutes the things that I can put my hand on. And I have great envy for, take a Steph Curry, greatest basketball player and shooter in the history of the game. Well, his whole mindset was, I want to be the greatest shooter ever. He knew what he had to do that, to shoot 10,000 shots a day.
Yeah.
And that became his world. And so he's singular focused on that one thing. And I think some people have the benefit of early on going, this is what I was made to do. This is my passion, my love, and I'm going to do everything I possibly can to see how far I can go. No, he could have had 1,000 reasons he would not be the greatest player, greatest shooter ever. But he had a very early on a singular focus. And my brain is always like, wow, like you, that's an interesting idea. And what I've learned to do is, okay, Walt Disney had his brother, Roy, who was his complement in building the world of Disney. And Walt was the dreamer, the Imagineer. And they had a thing called Disney drawer. And he would have an idea, they'd write it down, put it in the drawer. And Roy would go through later on, look at it. And he may keep those ideas there, but he pulled out the ones that actually had some significance or some traction or possibility. And I think that's what I'm doing is I'm cataloging. My ideas are still there. And we all probably have 50 notebooks in our bookcase of ideas. And it's amazing how you write it out, you spend a week later and you go back and go, that was a terrible idea. That would never work. And my process has gotten really refined on mostly looking at a reverse engineering of an idea. I look at a project and I go, okay, I'm going to look at the very end and I'm going to work backwards and see what would it take to make that successful. And for the most part, very few people do that in their creative work. They're not thinking of, okay, in 5 years, where do I want to be and how would I get there if I could really have, a lot of times you don't have any input or creative control, but if I could, how would I get there and be strategic? And maybe the thing that I've shifted my career most is helping a bunch of different types of projects, people think through the strategy of their creative output. What are the things that they can't do on their own that we can help, or I can help get them to a place that is, and ultimately it's what is their greatest potential. Whatever happens, whatever that means, it could be great success, it may not be, but what I don't like is seeing artists that have something and it's stopping because of some limitation that is actually overcomable or you can overcome. And usually it's because they don't understand business and they're good at what they do. They're good at art and creative, making their work. There's a whole other part of that, as you know, that you need people who are going to say, I'm the Sherpa, I'm going to help guide you through. So that's where my brain and my creativity and my art, I guess I would say, is simplifying, bringing clarity, thinking of strategic process and what is the end game and how do you launch well and how do you create moments that are going to leave an imprint on the world and leave audiences better when they leave your work. Yeah. That's kind of my artistic contribution, not being an artist myself.
Well, what do you say to artists that you're working with when they are trying to map out that career? Like, are there any kind of words of caution or words of wisdom or words of encouragement that you give to people who are maybe starting out probably within an artistic career to really think about and consider?
That's a very common question. They don't ask it directly like that. They're looking for that. And the one thing that I have found is that a creative person has their main work. So if I'm a musician, I make music, but I guarantee that person has creative surplus that's not being tapped into. And I meet them all the time. They're a musician who has a screenplay. There's a musician who has an idea for a podcast. There's a musician who has an idea for a product. They want to have this or that. And they're never talking to me about music. They're talking about their world, their creative world. Right. And I think I call it downtime. Downtime is not rest or replenishment or recreation. It's actually the creative surplus where when you're offset or you're off stage, there's other things that you're thinking and dreaming of. And it's really important for artists to not ignore that because they may have their brand or their world is bigger than their single thing. And their managers and agents are telling them, this is what matters. But it's like having a cup in front of you and you're dumping water into it. Well, you filled that, but you're keeping pouring water and it's just going somewhere. And I encourage you more artists than ever. When you meet someone who's just got a creative brilliance, I mean, there's so many things that they can do that are not going to take away from their core passion and work, but that would create a bigger opportunities, partnerships, sponsorships, new products, new revenue, new connections. And very rarely do you find a creative person who's just got one thing. That's important. And then I think it is going back to a team of people who are with you no matter your ups and downs. And in fact, the ones that are with you when you're down is so important. Nashville is what they call a city of unfinished songs. And that's where you need the community to say, listen, we all have unfinished paintings, unfinished scripts, unfinished songs. That is okay. That's part of it. And we're with you in that. And there's going to be maybe a potential that one of those does get completed someday and we can celebrate together. Yeah.
I think that's really beautiful. And that gave me an idea. It would be fun to do like a Saturday, like everybody come in their pajamas or something, bring your unfinished song, unfinished script, and we just kind of play together.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's unfinished business. That's life. Though. I mean, we're all going to leave this world unfinished.
Yeah. But I do love that too, giving the permission to focus on those other areas too. Because I even think from a career standpoint with the making money, sometimes there are things that you really feel called to do artistically or want to do artistically that may not make any money at all. And that's okay. Like that really is, there's no shame in making money other ways so that you can do the things that are inside of you, which, that's been a path for artists since the beginning of time. It just feels very foreign, I think, in a time where it seems like you should be able to make money out of anything. You should be able to go online and make money out of anything. That it's okay if you don't make money. Like that's not really, I mean, obviously you have to take care of yourself, but it's not the only path for artistic success.
I think that's it's so important because the true artist has to create no matter what.
Yeah.
They're compelled to, they feel the sense they're not whole unless they create.
Yeah.
And so if they have to find other ways and other means to support that and who knows? You never know how life turns and shifts and opportunities come and go. And isolation is the worst thing. That's one thing that I think is the most dangerous thing, is living in isolation on every level is where things go really, really sideways.
Yeah.
So artists want at times to be in isolation, and that is not where they need to be. There's times for that, but that needs to be more of intentional retreat. But I think what you're doing is saying, come, join us, don't hide, don't play with your demons. They wake up with you and they speak to you in your ear and they say, you're not going to do anything today. You're worthless. Yeah. No one cares. And for someone like you and your community to say, no, we're all going. We're going somewhere.
Yeah.
And it may be a stumbling through a windy path, but we're going someplace, and join us. That is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I've seen repeatedly in our little groups that we have, these spiritual collectives, is the power of hearing multiple people say, oh, I was really struggling with this week. Wait, what? You struggle with that too? And it's like a magic spell that's just broken. It's like, oh, okay. I thought there was something wrong with me. And clearly that's not the case. But you're right, that isolation can be deadly.
Oh, yeah. My wife was in some small group of women, and they're going around talking about some things. And, it's fine. It's very surface. And she said, does anybody else hate their husband today? And it was like, everyone was just like, me too. And I think that's,
yeah.
on me, but I also just, you're right. You speak it out and say, anybody else just feel like I've been in a dead season for 4 seasons?
Yeah. And then that all the lies that go around that get broken and you can find the way through. Yeah, it's so important. Well, what about you, Erik? What kind of motivates you to, like, the underneath thing that sort of motivates you to do what you do? And how do you keep that alive? Because I'm sure there's things that come in to block that sometimes, or temptations to go in this direction or that direction. But how do you keep alive the motivation for doing what you do?
Yeah. I think what's come down to more recently would be, I want to be useful, and I want to be tempered in the things I believe to be the best way, or the best for, whether that's society, whether that's best for the church, whatever that looks like. It's tempting to be a stronger voice and be more dogmatic and be more resentful of those that aren't, or those that are leading, or a little bitter of who's leading the charge, I should say, or the leading the way. Because I have very strong opinions about where we need to be and what's going off the rails. And I want to do that in a way that is not shutting people out, but is inviting them into something more beautiful and better.
Yeah.
And when I do that, and I feel like I do that through, it could be a film, it could be, we did a play to screen of The Hiding Place, and an adaptation with The Rabbit Room, came to theaters, went nationally, internationally, did fine. But it was an attempt to say, here's a new way of looking at an older story, but also this is actually really a beautiful story, has a lot of meaning, and it doesn't have to be a formula or have certain outcomes that are measurable in terms of like, this is part of the cause to stop or to save democracy or whatever that is,
right.
Whatever side. But just offering better things and finding new ways to say things that can resonate with people. I have found by doing that in small ways, people come to you, and I've found my people, and that's probably the most satisfying. Is while you tend to feel like you're alone, again, you find that people are with you and they share that, and then you want to do work with them.
Right.
So I'm motivated by wanting to be useful, wanting to find those people, and together create something that does move the needle back to where I think it needs to be. I think it's going to be a very hard few years coming up. The artist is going to be the first responder, tends to be the first responder, but there's going to be a real disregard of the artistic world. Increasingly, I think it's going to get harder and harder. But in that, as we know, as we talked about earlier, there's little remnants.
Yeah.
In the ruins, there's people. And that's exciting because that's where, again, small things happen that can be absolutely monumental. And I want to be a part of that. That's what motivates me. I have some big dreams still. That doesn't go away, but it's more of, what are the things that are not just chasing the moment, but are momentous. Yeah. Have momentum for other things I care about.
Wow. I'm, as you're talking, just so grateful to have you be on the podcast and that people can hear you speaking and hear you speaking your heart, because I think as a lot of people are off on their own in their own little world, and especially if they're just starting out or they've had bad experiences, we can get in our minds that it's me against everyone else and I have to fight against. And to hear voices that there are people who are in the space of being a producer or being a manager or being a marketing person or being a casting director or whatever, are actually looking for people to help. You want to create something, and to hear that there are people who are their friends on the other side, who want to be in partnership, and to be encouraged to be bold enough to ask for help, to reach out to people, to have confidence to share, here's what I'm thinking or here's what I want. That it's not, yes, there's a lot of rejection within the entertainment industry, but it's not necessarily personal rejection. And it's just about working together to get to something that's going to work. So I really appreciate your voice, because it's a really encouraging, inviting voice that I think people need to hear too.
Oh, I'm so grateful. If anybody is listening, watching in your world, they're not alone by any means. I think we're still disconnected. I think we're still feeling like, gosh, I wish I could. And I always feel like I am open. All my ideas are to give away. My time is as well. And I think that's the season of life I'm in is, I want to contribute so that, I'll leave this. This was a line that, a friend of mine who's a showrunner, this is years ago, he said, I don't think our generation, speaking to me, is thoughtful enough, creative enough, prayerful enough, deep enough, spiritual enough, all the enoughs to do the things we wanted to do. I think it's a generation coming up behind us. And when you say that, it's a posture of, okay, well then what is my role? And I do believe that, I don't believe we're nearly creative enough as the generations coming up. Well, our role is going to be to break the ice a bit, create a path for them, and to be around for them to say, hey, did this ever happen to you? And at this point in the marketing career and all the things I'm doing, I'm more useful in saying, don't do that.
Right.
Instead of saying, do this. Because if someone's saying do that, they are completely misguided and spinning tails, because no one knows what to do. But as you're older, you get to say, oh, I wouldn't do that. That's not that's not going to work. So I'm happy to help anybody anywhere that is looking for a friend along the way.
Wow. Erik, thank you so much for this conversation. I just really have enjoyed talking with you.
Likewise.
There's all kinds of other conversations I'd love to have. So I'll reach out to you later, but I really, really appreciate your time and your generosity. And just that you are working in the space that you are working in and doing what you're doing. You've really been an encouragement and an inspiration to me over this 20-year time. And I feel even more so just after getting to talk to you now. So thank you.
Oh, likewise, Lisa. Thank you for what you're doing, and love it. Love all there's not just an idea, it's thought upon thought upon thought of what you're building. And that's deep and dense and real. So thank you for marinating in that for so many, many years, but also just hours of thinking and praying. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to Be Make Do, a Soulmakers podcast. All links and resources are located in our show notes. Want to know your artist archetype? Take the quiz at soulmakers.org/quiz.